This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the mind of business leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
Well done is better than well said. And my key attribute is I love to get the work done. I love to pick up interesting problems. I like to run with the team, and the sense of achievement of delivering something that's truly awesome from a technology point of view that benefits the customers or benefits your colleagues, and saying well done to everybody for getting it done. That would be, I would say, my my key attribute that I sort of live by all the time.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences and insights at edsxevents.com. John van Uden, thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets podcast. Where are you joining us from today?
Nice to see you, David. I'm joining you from Helsinki in Finland.
What I want to do today, John, if that's all right, is talk with you about big moves, about hitting the ground running and making an impact with a new company and a new culture as a senior leader. Is that a good plan?
Yeah, sounds great.
Alrighty. So your career in financial and technology, it's seen you in long spells in senior roles at Citi and then TD over in Canada, and then January 2024, just over a year ago as we record now, you switched not only to a new company, but also to a new country and to a new culture, moving to Helsinki, where you are right now, to become CTO at Nordic Bank Nordea. So how have you coped? I'm talking about the kind of minus 29 degrees, the snow and the extremes of daylight. We love to talk about weather in the UK, but you've got some serious weather over there in Helsinki, right?
Yeah, I mean, my opening 2 weeks was minus 29. And I'm sure the country tried to kill me a couple of times because they just become ice skates as you walk around the city. But the city is truly amazing. It's an easy place to orientate yourself. The funny side of it all is the traffic jam is 3 cars. So it's an easy city to get around, and generally just a lovely place to be. You got to just make sure that you fully adopt the Finnish lifestyle. So I'm a full convert on saunas and cold water dips. It's life-changing. It really has been for myself. But yeah, so happiest place in the world, 8th year running.
Yeah. I saw a newsline about that maybe only last week or the week before or so. And it's very easy for us to joke, oh, it's the happiest place in the world and so on. But what do you put that down to? You know, we're going to be talking about corporate culture today and tuning into that. But as a kind of more societal culture thing, what is it that you've picked up on in just over 12 months there?
Yeah, so I suppose the first sort of myth to dispel is the happiest place in the world does not have people running around smiling and joking and looking like clowns all the time. Uh-huh. They have this warm glow in that they have contentness and happiness in their environment, and they have a well-balanced approach to life, right? So they enjoy the outdoor lifestyle, even though it can be quite cold at the winter. The winter sports are heavily adopted. But yeah, there's a warm nature about the Finns. They're direct, they're courteous of your space, and they're courteous of your time as well. So actually, it's a lovely society to be in, and I feel like truly embraced. Right, I've never been made to feel like an alien. So it's great. Actually, it's a really warm place to be, even though it is cold.
Even though it is cold, yeah, no, I like that that kind of paradox there, and of course that feeds its way into your work as well when your colleagues are part of that warm culture. So let's move on to your work, and well, perhaps we should explain a little bit about what Nordea is. You're based in Finland, but Nordea isn't a Finnish bank, is it?
No, it's like the leading Nordic bank across the 4 countries that make up the Nordics. So we have our head office in Finland, but we have strong presence in both Norway, Sweden, Denmark, of course, obviously our home office in Finland. So it has like 4 key businesses, a personal banking business, a business banking routine, a large corporates and institutions, and then we do asset management as well. So it's a full service bank across those 4 countries. And it has the number 1 Nordic mobile app. So it actually does quite well in a heavily digitized world.
Of course. And, again, it's very easy for people outside of the region to kind of clump Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries all into one clump. But I'm sure there are cultural differences across that region as well. Maybe we'll come on to that in a moment. But as part of you moving over there just over 12 months ago, as we say, it's a new senior leadership role, new country, new and nuanced corporate culture. Obviously, you had an idea of what you were getting yourself into. How did you approach stepping into that role? What was your homework that you set yourself like before you got off that plane for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, there was a heavy amount of pre-work really around the work and the role, right? It was super important to make sure that I could see a challenge in what they needed to do at the bank, some understanding of what the bank was facing and what it really wanted to drive. To me, a good amount of the senior management team to make sure that I was comfortable that, hey, we would click and we'd be able to make a difference together. And I think the openness and the approach within the Nordics allows you to have, those dialogues to make sure that we're making the right conversations. So that pre-work was really quite an important part of the A, deciding if they like me, B, if I like them, do I like the environment, but equally enough of a research around not only the people who are currently within Nordea, but meeting people who'd been there before out of my network to say, hey, now you're not there, tell me what it's about. Tell me what it's like. Tell me how the organization reacts to change. Is it adverse to change? Tell me what it's like with regard to its risk profile. And what I found interesting in this journey was there was a consistent story, whether the people were inside Nordea still or whether they'd left and moved on. Because sometimes you can meet people who've moved on that only tell you about the bad things, right? But everyone was really balanced in telling you about Nordea and the challenges it faces and the things it's not good at and the things it's really good at, and how the environment deals with different types of styles. So that was a lot of research prior to joining. That was really quite important. I probably could have done some more homework on living in Finland, but I think I sort of prioritized the work and the challenge that may be there, and that I would be a fit.
And how about your role specifically? What are your responsibilities there?
Yeah, I'm the CTO, so I'm responsible for core technology, and that encompasses the data centers, the technology that sits inside those data centers, the management of what we'd call platforms that applications live within, and then the responsibility of modernizing the technologies and the adoption of cloud and the adoption of AI. So I have quite a broad technology mandate. The areas that I don't get involved in, obviously, are application development and application support. They're the two sort of areas I don't do. And I have some really good, strong peers that I work with in that space.
Yeah. And then in terms of what Nordea is going through at the moment, you mentioned it there. I think every organization, every CIO, every CTO, every CISO, pretty much everyone with a C hat on is grappling with things like AI at the moment, and what does it mean for their organization, and trying to innovate while at the same time trying to minimize risk and make sure they're not falling foul of regulatory things that maybe aren't even all that clear right now. Are there any particularly big challenges or big programs that you have been thrust onto almost immediately after you joined?
Well, I joined and then was handed DORA, which was an interesting thing to be handed. And obviously that has all of us across the European region, making sure that we are able to be adherent to all the requirements that are inside those, 80 plus standards that we have to get through. So that was a baptism of fire coming from a Canadian bank that was managed by OSFI and was predominantly in Canada, to then be landed into a European region that has the nuances of country versus, regional sort of oversight and governance. So that was a challenging project. And like I would say most of our peers, they have the aspirations of trying to modernize their platform. And at the same time, you're living with 40 years worth of technology that's evolved over time, and how do you simplify that environment? And that's been, if I mix hey, we've got to make sure that we get to a good state of compliance, the DORA, we've got to make sure that we deliver the resiliency that our customers demand and need in order to trust us, whilst you've got an estate that has every flavor that you could possibly ask for out of technology, and trying to modernize it. It's like trying to plug new tech into a 100-year-old house. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. And boy, rewiring those old houses is a big old job as well. Trust me, I know that one at first-hand experience. Okay. So that is a big ball to be passed not long after you joined there. Coming back to you starting at Nordea, there are lots of cliches about making first impressions count and all of that. Was that something you were conscious of? And, what was your approach to making a positive first impression when you are the new person in the room and that there's so much you don't know about yet?
The importance for me a little bit is to make sure you carry your character consistently through when you turn up, and therefore making sure that you're honest and straightforward from the day one you're there, and you're not inconsistent in the way you behave and act. So I think it was important for me to understand to carry on to be myself, but at the same time learn relatively quickly the tolerances for how they all interact with each other. They are 4 different countries, but they are very different countries in a cultural aspect as well. So whilst similar, they do have different nuances that you have to learn to live with. So I think the first aspect was making sure that you remain consistent along that journey about how you are, who you are, and make sure people understand that as they get to engage with you. There's obviously a lot of level setting people where you've been and where you've come from and what you bring to the table, at the same time as acknowledging the company that you're in, how far they've come as well. I mean, I've been in places where people turn up and all they end up telling you about is everything they did before, how everything was awesome, and how everything you're currently sitting at is not great, and we need to rip it all out. So maintaining the balance of acknowledging great work that's been done, and how do we make that better, and how do we improve it, and literally, as you turn up, generating that blend of all the good things you saw before, don't bring any of the bad things you had before, and then meld them in the same way. I think that's been a very important start to the journey at Nordea and in Finland. So, yeah.
And ultimately, you talk about being yourself, about being consistent as well. And under times of stress, we've all been in situations where we respond in different ways, and stepping into a new role with a lot of responsibility, that certainly can be a time of stress. But that thing about being consistent, being yourself, I guess there's a sense of trust there that they've hired me for me. They already know enough about me and how I show up, what I bring to the table, in order for them to be confident that I'm the right person to lead the technology function here. So that gives you some confidence there. I guess the other part is about setting those expectations, about people knowing what to expect from you. You talk about being yourself. That means that other people have an expectation as to how you're going to be as well. So it's about building that sense of who you are, communicating that, and building the trust, building the relationships, because relationships are always going to be key in there. How did you go about, this is where I'm getting to, how did you go about, therefore, building the relationships with your other senior stakeholders?
Yeah, so I got some great advice from actually the manager I used to work for when I departed the last place. And he was like, hey, John, when you land, have dinner or have lunch with everybody. And I was like, what do you mean everybody? everybody you need to talk to, go have lunch, go have dinner, go have drink, and don't make it about the transaction. Go make it about understanding what they think are the number one challenges. Because when you're in, they'll be more open about telling you all those challenges, and then at least take one thing off their table that you'll go and do for them to get it done. Build some credibility that, and obviously knowing, and that manager of mine understood who I was and how I was energized. He was like, you're energized by getting stuff done. Take something off somebody to say you'll go and get it done for them, and then go do it, right? I think that was awesome advice. I've come from an environment where people don't tend to have lunch together. They tend to work at their desk. UK, the US, Canada, very much work at your desk, work through the day. The Nordics, the lunch is a really important part of the day. So that was an interesting change, that people go for lunch and they have lunch, right? So I've done that a fair amount of time. That's really helped me create relationships that not only set out the stall of hey, this is how I like to work, this is I think it's new, but understand what they needed to get that moving forward. And then also relaying that, that consistent message within the team as well. The first important thing for me is always establishing team one. Team one is the most important team to get right, and making sure that team one understands how you operate, things you don't like, the things you do like, and what you think is what great looks like during that journey. So, making sure we've got what I would call the network well understood, and make sure you have the ability to connect with that network alongside, make sure team one understands the rules of the game that they've now got. And that was, establishing team one was priority number one when I got here.
And what about the communication piece there as well? Because I presume English is the business language there and with your colleagues, but we all know there are languages within languages, particularly in the corporate world, and that those can be the most difficult to master. So how have you found tuning in to how your colleagues communicate there?
Yeah, I mean, the corporate language is the most complex translation language we have to get through. It's relatively straightforward, and I'm only on the start of my journey for learning Finnish. So I had my first lesson yesterday. I've got one on Sunday. So I'm trying to learn what is supposed to be the hardest language in the world, but I'm making my way. But the corporate language, there is no tutor to go get. There is no book. There is no app. I've literally got to then do this game of listen a lot, replay what I understood, and then reconfirm what you thought they meant by some code word they use. So you've got the normal, there's some 3-letter words that people use and you don't know what they mean. Sometimes they're exactly the same 3 letters, but they mean something completely different in the context. So I spent a lot of time nursing through, hey, you said that, did you mean this? So I understand it in the same frame. And that replay played out really well. We obviously had some moments where we got it wrong, where that can't possibly be true. And then when we went through the conversation, it's oh, now I understand. So that's actually been quite difficult. I think there was a period for the first 3 months where when somebody said something the same way, I made an assumption it meant the same thing as it meant at the last 2 places. And then when I got through it, and I'm like, oh dear, that's not what I meant. So, and that's the important part, right? When you don't get it and you don't understand it, being able to say, hey, I don't really understand what you're telling me, and get them to try and reframe it. The other important thing to always remember as well is I have to make sure I slow myself down, because they're operating in English, I'm operating in English, but my brain works in the same pattern. And now they're doing a translation at the same time, right? So I have to remember to slow myself down. I have to remember to just reaffirm they understood what I said as well. So because they're obviously having to do translations, real translations.
Yes, indeed. One of my main experiences of working abroad back in my consultancy days was I didn't go to Finland. I went to the Netherlands instead. So I was working for a Dutch banking group, and in the whole, Dutch speak English almost better than we do in the UK, to be fair. But I did make an effort. I was over there for a number of months. I wasn't permie over there. But I tried to learn some Dutch, and I went to some classes. And it did a couple of things. First of all, absolutely love the language. Once I got some of the basic rules out the way, I felt far more integrated in the place where I was living rather than just feeling like a visitor there. And secondly, I felt a lot of goodwill from my colleagues as well. They know that I was trying to meet them where they're at. And even if when I started a conversation in Dutch, they would almost immediately turn it around and speak English back to me, as often happens when Brits are working abroad. There was a certain warmth, and if nothing else, it was another kind of conversation starter. What have you learned today? Brilliant. Oh, that's fantastic. We would actually pronounce it like this. Great. A lot of goodwill. Good luck with your Finnish language journey as well. It's not an easy language from what I can understand. John, are you someone who sets themselves a plan, like a kind of 30-day, 60-day, 100-day plan for the beginning of your tenure? We've had a number of conversations on the show here before about how people moving into a new job will, whether it is a commitment to the board, to their stakeholders, or something to themselves, just to have these sort of checkpoints, these little review cards of what they feel as though they've learned and what they've been able to take on board and what gaps there are or their peers think there are after certain times. Is that anything that you did when you started there?
Yeah. I mean, there's the elements of just setting those markers out for yourself that say, hey, I'd be happy if I got to this point at this date and at this point at this day. And hey, this is super important for me to have right. Otherwise, the next session would be a grind. So I did have those markers set out for myself around orientation within the environment, a setup around where were they and where did they need to get to, and a very important step around establishing Team One and understanding that we created a safe zone for Team One where we could have conflict and we could have decision making and we could have agreement and commitment amongst Team One. And everybody within Team One would defend each other, right, to make sure that we drive against an objective. So, yeah, I would say I don't plan to the level of like, here's day 25 and here's day 30, but I set the mission and the visions together so that I'm like, hey, here's the mission, here's the vision, and this is the markers I want at 30, 100, 1 year, and 2 years.
So looking back just over a year into your adventure, what would you say have been the biggest learnings so far? Is there anything you'd do differently? And what would you say is the biggest challenge that you've faced as well? So biggest learnings, anything you do differently, and biggest challenge so far?
Biggest learning. I resisted the temptation to assess the organisation based on its maturity, because I feared that they would see that as an element of criticism. So I avoided doing that until I got to like the 9th month. We had a fairly difficult period of instability, and we just stepped down this road of like, hey, we should just review the maturity of the organisation and see where we are. Actually, that was eye-opening. There was a number of assumptions I'd made before that point, but I now had actionable data that was at least catered towards gravitating where I was now versus where I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago with relate to the other organisations. And the learning was that when we went through that maturity assessment, the team did not see it as criticism. They were like, oh, now we're on the same playing field about how mature are we. Well, we thought we were a 4, and actually this says us as 2, but now we know what 3 and 4 means. So that was really quite strong. So, if I ever was to take on, more responsibility or a different role within Nordea, or then, understanding the operational maturity and the technical maturity of the platform or the people or the groups, I would always do that first and just make sure people understand it's not a criticism where you are. It tells you where you are so you can build a map.
Yeah, and it's also about the journey sometimes. It's about the questions that you ask in order to come to those, those numbers that are the important thing rather than sometimes the numbers themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and it allows us to have a dialogue on areas that we're okay to acknowledge where we are. Hey, 3 out of 5 is good enough, but actually here where we're a 3, we need to be a 5. And we then can get into, okay, so what would it take to be there? Who needs to carry that? So I think, on the learnings, that was probably the one I shouldn't have waited 9 to 10 months to do. But now we have it. It's a good marker, and it's a good place for us to have a dialogue around.
And then in terms of challenges and advice to anybody who's thinking of embarking on a similar big journey, stepping into new company, new culture, all the rest of that stuff, what's the kind of big piece of advice? I like the lunch advice for one, but maybe I'm biased on that because it's nearly lunchtime when we're recording here.
Yes. I'd give 2 pieces of really good advice, and one's a little bit of, it requires you to make a modification, not the rest of the world. So first one is the risk culture in an organization cannot be changed by pure will. And therefore, you need to recognize the risk culture that you have within an organization, and banks have, fairly high risk cultures. So don't believe that you can change the risk culture of a bank by sheer will and energy. That will not happen. What you've got to do is really have a methodical way of living in within the risk appetite, but delivering at pace and at speed that you want to get to. So I think, that was one that, after 2 different journeys, I've now learned actually you've got to live within its risk culture and then figure out how to move at pace within the culture. So I think that's number 1. And number 2 is you can get so engrossed in moving into a new exciting role that has exciting challenges and into a new country. And if you have a personality profile that's like mine, I was so heavily rotated into the role that I forgot to enjoy the other part of this journey, which is being in a new culture. So I think that's, make sure you balance both aspects of taking up something like the journey I've been through, that you embrace both the career and the energy you get from that sort of challenge, but also get yourself out there a little bit in the social side of where you've sort of embraced yourself. I think that's, in the early days you have to spend hard on the work, but make sure you balance it with the other part of your journey, which is a new country, a new set of people, a new set of friends. That would be my other learning.
It sounds to me, John, as though you are absolutely embracing the experience professionally as well as culturally and personally as well. So more power to you. And as I say, good luck with the Finnish lessons. We're almost finished in our conversation today. But before we let you go, we ask all of our guests here on CXO Secrets some quickfire questions. The show is called CXO Secrets. So, John, what is your secret? Put your modesty to one side for a moment. Tell us what key attribute about you believe has enabled you to achieve the great things that you have.
I love a sentiment and motto that from an ex-president of the United States, and probably harder to talk about United States presidents at this point in time, but well done is better than well said. And my key attribute is I love to get the work done. I love to pick up interesting problems. I like to run with the team, and the sense of achievement of delivering something that's truly awesome from a technology point of view that benefits the customers or benefits your colleagues, and saying well done to everybody for getting it done. That would be, I would say, my my key attribute that I sort of live by all the time.
We also do a Pass the Question here on the show, where guests get to put a question to a future guest on the show, whoever they may be. A previous guest, Milos Topic, VP for IT and Chief Digital Officer at Grand Valley State University, has this quite challenging question to ask.
What is that one thing that you keep delaying and postponing, and you keep telling yourself that you're going to do next year or in 2 years? or when you find the next job, or when you retire? What is that one thing that you really want to accomplish, but you've been finding excuses for years not to do?
Well, I mean, the one I'm trying to live by at the moment, which is I've visited probably over 35 countries as part of the roles that I've held at both Citibank, TD, and now at Nordea. And whilst I've visited a fair number of countries, I've really only visited them to go to work. And, you know, it will be a shocker to some of my friends that Australian-based. I actually only went to Australia for 36 hours. I got off a plane, I went to work, and then I went back to the plane to go to another country. So the objective that I keep putting off, but I will endeavour to start enjoying it a lot more, is go and visit some of these countries and actually visit them without my work hat on. So that's something I keep delaying, but I need to just pull that out and get on with that.
Sounds great. Carpe diem, my friend. Carpe diem. Finally, John, what question would you like me to put to a future guest on this show?
I often struggle with I would call the technical religious wars, or the tribes that get formed in organizations where, and we have a term for it here, which is being called to a meeting to act like dad, where you're called to a meeting, there's two groups, they have opposing views, they have opposing data points. And I have some tricks of the trade that I use to try and get through that. But your next guest, it would be lovely for them to share what are their tricks of the trade to deal with when we have tribes or conflict within two different teams that are acting like silos.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And I look forward to asking it to our next guest here on the show. For now, though, John van Uden, thank you very much indeed for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Kiitos, David.